Number 5. In 2016, my boyfriend and I went camping in eastern Pennsylvania. The place we decided to stop for the night was primitive. Camping was free, no cell service, barely a road, etc. We did encounter two other people. They might not factor into what happened later at all, but they were creepy, so I'll describe them. The first was a woman who had her truck off to the side of the road a little as we drove past. She had the hood open and seemed to be waiting for someone to stop and offer to help. Usually my boyfriend had no problem helping someone, but he said his time something about her put him off. She didn't really seem like she needed help, and usually people who need help look at you hopefully as you approach. She looked like she just expected we would stop. That's what my boyfriend said anyway. I hadn't really noticed anything that strange about her. The next person came when we had chosen a spot and were setting up a fire for hot dogs. I had noticed people drive by a few times, but my boyfriend pointed out each time was the same car, and the man in the car watched us each time he passed. My boyfriend was a little uneasy about this, but we had driven around for a while before finding a place we liked. It had been raining and everything was muddy, and we wanted the driest site possible. He could have been doing the same thing. We briefly thought about moving, but the road was muddy too. If he wanted to find us, all he had to do was follow the tracks. There were some other tracks, but not many. He'd only have to backtrack a little to locate us again. He didn't come by another time, so we stayed and spent the several remaining hours before dark goofing off. No one else drove by. Whether or not those two had anything else to do with our experience, the real fear came later. We had gone to sleep in our tent, and sometime around 3 a.m., we were awoken by this very loud noise. I can't describe it very well or even remember exactly what it sounded like, but my boyfriend said it reminded him of a chain gun revving up. It was also similar to how it would sound if someone recorded a shovel being dragged over gravel and played it over a loudspeaker, is another way he described it. He jumped up and looked out the little window, but couldn't really see anything. The sound repeated itself another few times. I was too scared to speak, so my boyfriend whispered that it was probably miles off and I should go back to sleep. I didn't question this, as I figured loud sounds could be easily heard miles off. After we left, he told me it sounded like it had actually been coming from just down the road, but he didn't want to freak me out. Looking back, I probably should have wondered why he would bother to whisper if apparently the sound was far off. I was still terrified. Every little thing I heard outside sounded like someone was walking around the tent. We lay there for a while longer when finally my boyfriend told me to get dressed because we were leaving. I got alarmed by this, and even more alarmed when he unwrapped the machete we had bought just for this trip from its plastic before opening the tent. We quickly packed up and loaded the car. I looked around for footprints that weren't our own, but despite the moon providing plenty of light, I couldn't really see. I did point out something my boyfriend hadn't noticed, though, before we got into the car. There was a beer can by our dead fire that hasn't been there before. We didn't even bring beer. While we were driving away, my boyfriend explained that he was nervous someone might have been trying to lure us out, so he didn't think it was a good idea to run from the tent right away. He also half expected to find out gas tank had been siphoned out, but that wouldn't have stopped us because we had a hybrid car. We joked that that would make a funny hybrid commercial. Number of brutal murders avoided by driving a hybrid. 2, we only joked because we were about shitting ourselves from fear and adrenaline even then. Number 4, a little over 18 years ago, I had just gotten out of the military. I drove all the way from Louisiana to my hometown in Montana without incident. I spent a few days at home and then got back on the road because my new home destination was Boise, Idaho. It was February, so instead of going straight down the length of the state, I cut across the panhandle of Idaho into Washington. The highway going straight down through the state is really twisty and very dangerous in the winter. So I crossed the state line into Washington. It was a Sunday and it was very, very early in the morning. As cliche as it sounds, there was quite a bit of fog in the air. I had been driving for a while and I really had to use the bathroom. Now, normally, given how I was out in the middle of nowhere, I would normally just pulled over on the side and took a whiz, but since it was so foggy and hard to see, I thought it's safer to just wait until I hit the next small town. So I drove for maybe 5 more miles, and I started seeing signs for a town. I can't remember for the life of me the name of the town, but I think it was Linden or Linder, something like that. It was on I-90 going into the Spokane Valley. So I head towards the sign, which was a right turn off the interstate, and it's a short drive up this road, and I reach the town. It was small, but I thought nothing of it, since I was from a small town in Montana. Now here's where things get odd. There was not a single person to be found. There were cars in business, but not a single person to be found, no one walking the street, no logging trucks driving. Everything was just as still as the air. I stopped at a gas station. It was one of those one-and-all places that did car repair, tires, etc., but no one was at the counter. I thought, well, maybe it's just really early. So I went around to the side to see if the bathroom was locked, and it was. As I made my way back around to the front of the building, saw a delivery truck. It was a Coke Classic truck, except it wasn't moving. Its headlights were on, the hazard lights were on, and the passenger and driver's side doors were open, just sitting there in the middle of the street. Yes, I was getting a bad vibe. So I got back in my car and went back the way I came. I got back to a 90 and thought again about just pissing on the side of the road. But honestly, I was too afraid. I continued driving until I hit Spokane. Honestly, I was more than a bit freaked out and had completely forgotten I had to piss. I didn't see anything creepy or hear anything creepy, but the stillness in the air and the complete lack of life, human or animal, was just terrifying and unsettling. I looked on the map to where I was once I got to Spokane, which was a Rand McNally's map, because GPS on phones was just not a thing yet, and I could not find it at all on the map. Even as I was writing this, I looked at Google Maps, and nothing by the name Linden or otherwise is on the map. I still to this day will never forget that feeling of just freaky displacement I felt there. When I got to Boise, I told my friend about it, and he thought I was just trying to rip off Silent Hill or Resident Evil, and honestly, I can't blame people for saying that. But at the same time, that was the reason I wouldn't piss on the side of the road. I kept recalling the part in RE1 where the hikers were killed by the murderous dogs. Anyway, if you stuck around this long, thanks for reading. And if you know of a town on HY2 between Coeur d'Alene, Idaho and Spokane, Washington, people let me know. If you are from there, I mean no offense, but your town is creepy as frick. Number 3. When I was really young, we were on a family trip, and me and my older brother took a ride on a boat. I remember my mom telling us to avoid the big floating thing. She thought it was a buoy to signalize a dangerous rock underwater or something. Being kids, of course, we went straight there to explore it. So turns out it was not a buoy. That was a body of a tourist that went missing a week ago, as the police informed us a few days later. Creepy thing is, he was one of a group of people that had disappeared together. I believe they never find the rest. So not a good childhood memory. Number 2. I was Boy Scout, camping with my group of older buddies and an adult leader in Yellowstone. We had been backpacking for 2 days and stopped in a beautiful little clearing at the bottom of some huge tree-covered hills. The sun started to set, we made a fire, and I began to climb up into the trees to dig a hole and fill it back up. You know what I mean. As I squat there, basking in moonlight and appreciating the glow of fire among the trees, I looked up to a ridge line a few hundred yards away where the moon was rising, and I shit you not, I saw a damn big cougar crest the hill and just watch our fire. It was likely no danger to me, but seeing that outline, that unmistakable shoulder crawl they do, was haunting. I watched it sit there for a good 15 minutes until I was called back by my worried buds. I pointed the cat out to them when I got done because it was still just watching us. Crazy. Number 1. I was hiking a section of the North Umpqua Trail, northern part of Southern Oregon, a few years back with my SIL. It's a 72-mile trail broken into sections that can be easily hiked in a day. At the time, I lived about midway up the trail, fairly remote in a small community. It was mid-fall this one day when we set out. The trail was running along the south side of the Umpqua River and was pretty up and down in the beginning. We made it to a fairly flat section that was running just above the river. There was this beautiful view of the river through the trees, so we stopped to get some pictures and take a water break. I immediately felt extremely uncomfortable, like someone was watching us. I slowly turned my head to look behind us, across the trail, and up a very small incline. Through the trees, I could see a small meadow. Across the meadow, maybe 15 yards from us, was a tent, an old canvas-style tent. As I'm looking, I noticed bones strung from the trees all around the meadow, like creepy death wind chimes. My stomach just clenched and dropped. I leaned into Sil and whispered, Do not turn around and look behind us. Just continue walking up the trail and run when I tell you. We were close enough to the river that nobody not right next to us could have heard this. She did exactly as I told her to, setting off at the brisk walk we'd been at before. We got maybe 10 yards, and I could hear footsteps through the forest floor, coming from behind and slightly above us. That part of the forest is very dense. There is a thick moss cover under the trees, so footsteps on it make a very specific sound. I leaned forward and told her to pick up her speed. She did, I did, and so did whoever was behind us. I leaned forward again and told her to run as fast as she could and not stop until I told her to. For two middle-aged women, both slightly overweight, we ran like the damn wind. I just kept telling her, go, go, go. I could see ahead of us that the trail made an incline and veered to the right along the river and around a cliff. I knew at that point that whoever it was going to have to come down onto the trail or stop. We kept running. We probably ran at least a mile after that, even though we could no longer hear anyone behind or above us. That section of the trail was about 9 miles, and we were not halfway when this happened. We eventually slowed down, but just hurried as fast as we could the rest of the way. We had arranged for her younger brother, not my ex, to pick us up. We made it to the next trailhead fairly early, so we made our way out to 138 and started walking east towards home, knowing he'd find us. He did, and was shocked at our story. We got home and immediately called our local sheriff who lived just above us at the ranger station. He came to the house and heard our story. He explained it might be a day or two before they could get in on the trail, as they had a missing hunter at the time they were searching for. So a few days go by and he shows up at our house to let me know that we were not crazy or imagining things, and someone really did chase us. I asked what they found and who it was. He looked down at the ground and then looked up and said, I'm not going to tell you what we found or who it was, because if I do, you will never hike anywhere again. What we found was not normal and will not happen up here again. He then instructed me to never, ever hike unarmed again. I never found out what they found or who it was. I never hiked that section of trail again, and it completely burnt last year. I also never hiked unarmed, ever again. That was huge for me, as I was not a gun person. I had many incidents living up there in a national forest with wild animals and other strange things, but nothing ever scared me as much as that day.